Hello, this is Ernie and Hai. Join us on this travel adventure. Nagasaki is a historic harbor located in between the western mountains of Kyushu Islands at the edge of a scenic channel of the sea, as you can see on the video. Nagasaki is famous for being the only international port open to the outside world during its seclusion or isolationist policy for over 200 years, beginning 1633. Nagasaki is also known to have the largest Christian community in all of Japan and was the center of Roman Catholicism during the 16th century, who eventually suffered persecution for the next 200 years. That was marked by the crucifixion of 26 Catholic martyrs on February 5, 1597. Although post-war Nagasaki has remarkably recovered and developed into a modern cosmopolitan and multicultural city, it will always be remembered as being the site of the second nuclear bomb attack on August 9, 1945 that ended the Second World War. We were lucky to be in Nagasaki during the 72nd anniversary of its nuclear bombing on August 9, 1945. Devastation and human suffering vividly portrayed in the War Museum was understandable, but the repetitive mention and strong emphasis that the bomb was dropped by the USA tends to insinuate and picture the USA as the initiator and bad guy of this war, when in fact it's the contrary. The bomb was dropped in concurrence with the Allied forces, and Japan was warned repetitively that atomic bomb will be used until they surrender, and given an ultimatum during the Potsdam Conference in July 1945, which the Japanese military government contemptuously ignored. Let us therefore turn back the hands of time and trace the sequence of events that led to the debacle of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Japan have developed a mighty military force 30 years before World War II. In 1910, it invaded and occupied Korea. In 1931, it invaded and occupied Manchuria and set up a puppet government. In 1937, it invaded Nanking, then the capital of China at that time, and caused mass murder, rape, and many atrocities that resulted to some 300,000 deaths after the city was captured. On September 27, 1940, Japan signed a tripartite pact with Nazi Germany and fascist Italy. On December 7, 1941, Japan launched a surprise coordinated attack on Pearl Harbor and other Southeast Asian countries and South Pacific islands.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
That was President Roosevelt. Certainly, this unprovoked act of war on the USA and other Southeast Asian countries with no explicit warning, and given the fact that the USA and the Southeast Asian countries were neutral countries at the time of invasion, this deliberate attack of aggression is considered a war crime. Although Japan was successful in their blitzkrieg attack on China, Southeast Asia, and Pearl Harbor in 1941, but as soon as the US and the Allied forces made up of the UK, Australia, New Zealand, China, USSR, France, and others entered the war in December 1941, it took only 6 months that the tide of war started to turn around. Beginning May 1942, the US and Allied forces started to get an upper hand as the Japanese naval and armed forces started to lose decisive battles in the Coral Sea, Midway, the Bay of Milne, and by 1943, Guadalcanal and other South Pacific islands, such as the Saipan and Iwo Jima and others, started to fall. It was downhill from here on for the Japanese Imperial Army. Tokyo and the military industrial cities of mainland Japan was subjected to continuous strategic carpet firebombing. Here, Emperor Hirohito inspects the devastation of Tokyo after a series of firebombing in March 1945. The Battle of Okinawa was the last major land battle of World War II, the largest amphibious assault in the Pacific theater with 180,000 US troops assaulting Okinawa. It was the bloodiest battle of the Pacific War that lasted 3 months, from mid-March to early July 1945. The crushing defeat of Okinawa marks the fall of the Japanese Imperial Army, and their holdings in the other Southeast Asian countries and South Pacific islands started to fall one by one like dominoes. In spite of shattering defeat and several losses, Japan refused to surrender. The Potsdam Conference of the Big Three Allied Head of State, US President Harry Truman, USSR Joseph Stalin, and UK Prime Minister Clement Attlee, was the last of the World War II meetings from July to August 1945. We had the opportunity to visit this historic place in May of 2007, where the declaration for the surrender of Japan was drafted and announced to the Japanese government with the threat of prompt and utter destruction if ignored. The declaration of surrender was relayed to the press and to the public and to the people of Japan through 3 million leaflets on July 26, 1945. Since no response was received after 10 days, it was construed to be ignored. It was therefore decided to drop the first uranium-235 nuclear bomb on August 6, 1945 on the industrial city of Hiroshima.
Let there be no mistake. We shall completely destroy Japan's power to make war. They may expect a rain of ruin from the air, the like of which has never been seen on this earth. The world will note that the first atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, a military base. If Japan does not surrender, bombs will have to be dropped on war industries. I urge Japanese civilians to leave industrial cities immediately and save themselves from destruction. I realize the tragic significance of the atomic bomb. Having found the atomic bomb, we have used it. We have used it against those who attack us without warning at Pearl Harbor, against those who have starved and beaten and executed American prisoners of war, against those who have abandoned all pretense of obeying international laws of warfare. We have used it in order to shorten the agony of war, in order to save the lives of thousands and thousands of young Americans.
In spite of the massive destruction of the atomic bomb on Hiroshima with thousands of casualties, the military government continues to be defiant and unfazed, and President Truman's appeal was ignored. So the second bomb, a plutonium-239, was dropped over Nagasaki 4 days later on August 9, 1945. August 10, 1945. Japanese government accepts the term of unconditional surrender. August 15, 1945, Emperor Hirohito radio broadcast to the nation Japan's surrender to end the war.
各世界の体制と帝国の現状とに鑑み、以上の措置をもって自局を収集せんと欲し、ここに終了なる汝臣民に次ぐ陳は帝国政府をして米英四蘇四国に対し
Although the Japanese accepted the terms of surrender on August 10, 1945, it was not until September 2, 1945 that the instrument of surrender was officially signed on the deck of the battleship Missouri, anchored at Tokyo Bay. The battleship was packed with hundreds of newsmen, photographers, sailors, top brass military with legendary names of MacArthur, Nimitz, McCain, Wainwright, Stilwell. As soon as the Japanese delegation arrived at 9 a.m., General MacArthur started the solemn ceremony under a dusky, cloudy sky.
It is my earnest hope, and indeed the hope of all mankind, that from this solemn occasion a better world shall emerge out of the blue. I announce it my firm purpose to proceed in the discharge of my responsibilities with justice and tolerance.
Representatives of Japan and Allied forces then signed the instrument of surrender.
Let us pray that peace be now restored to the world, and that God will preserve it always. These proceedings are closed.
As the solemn ceremony concluded, the clouds cleared and allowed the bright morning sun to shine. Thereafter, an impressive display of over 1,000 planes fly over in precision formation to fill the sky, a fitting ending to mark the end of World War II.
The thoughts and hopes of all America, indeed of all the civilized world, are centered tonight on the battleship Missouri.
"72 years after the end of World War II, the bloodiest war in human history, Nagasaki and the rest of Japan came out from the shadows of its dark history, stepping out to a bright future as General MacArthur has hoped for in his speech. Because Nagasaki has always been a multicultural city for some 4 centuries, conflicts among the followers of different beliefs and faith always existed. But following the shocking devastation of the city and untold human sufferings, the surviving citizens put aside differences and banded together irrespective of their cultural and religious differences and united in a single prayer, a prayer for peace that transcends religion, and started to rebuild the city. Nagasaki and the rest of Japan's recovery was spectacular. Its industrialization and economic growth between 1955 to 1973 has been described as miraculous and unprecedented internationally. As you can see from these post-war photographs, it had become the 3rd largest economy in the world in just 10 to 15 years post-World War II. Shinto is the oldest belief system in Japan, but no date as to its establishment, though closely related to the creation of the Japanese islands according to legend. It is an indigenous faith of the Japanese people. It is a natural religion and an optimistic faith where humans are taught to be fundamentally good and evil is caused by evil spirits. So the purpose of Shinto rituals is to keep the evil spirits away by purification. They incorporate ancestor worship and nature spirits with the belief of a sacred or divine power that dwells in both the animate and inanimate things, and that the sacred powers called kami dwells in these shrines. They emphasize on purity and cleanliness and value harmony with nature, order, and self-development. Since Buddhism was introduced to Japan in the 6th century through Korea, it has harmonized and coexisted happily with Shintoism through the years. So religion in Japan manifests primarily in Shinto and Buddhism, which they often practice simultaneously. Catholicism was introduced to Japan in 1549 by the Portuguese explorers and missionaries. They were evangelized by Saint Francis Xavier, a Jesuit priest. There were many converts that by 1570 there were 100,000 Christian Catholics and some 40 churches, such that Nagasaki was dubbed as the Rome of Japan. Today, Nagasaki is still considered as one of the most Catholic cities in Japan. Many churches were totally destroyed after the nuclear bombing on August 9, 1945, such as the Yurikami Cathedral and Oyura Cathedral, famous for discovering the hidden Christians. The surviving Christians showed their resiliency by celebrating an outdoor mass beside the ruins on its first anniversary of the bombing for healing and hope. Then they started to rebuild and restore the churches at its original site. Pope Francis' historic visit to Japan on November 2019 rekindled some dark history of persecution of Japanese Catholics for over 200 years, where they were forced to give up their faith or face torture or death. Many of them went into hiding for over 200 years and were called the hidden Christians.
Well, you have to negotiate some steps on the uneven surface, probably about 1 mile. Today we have to walk.
Now let us turn our attention to the city center, once a virtual wasteland following the nuclear bombing 72 years ago. But the city did not become a nuclear wasteland for long.
That is what we call Inasayama, and it was United Nations. That is the July the 7th this year, and more than.
Note the spectacular cityscape as shown in the previous photos at the beginning of the video program. Here we can see at street level the busy street traffic and new buildings. The city continues to grow and overcome their past destruction and immeasurable casualties. So even with the devastation and tragedy, there is always hope for the future, a testimony of the human ability to rejuvenate to a new life and energy. The Jima is a man-made island in the port of Nagasaki, built in 1636, supposedly to house and segregate the Portuguese traders and missionaries from the Japanese population and control their religious missionary activities. In 1636, the shogunate expelled the Portuguese and passed an edict to close the country off from the outside world. But in 1641, they allowed the Dutch traders and merchants to occupy the Jima as their warehouse and trading post. As they closed off the whole country for 240 years, this was the only port open in Japan. The Dutch was their only link to the outside world. The Dutch was confined in this 150 by 150 meter island for the next 200 years. The Jima no longer exists as it was closed in 1854 after 200 years. Glover Garden is a park built for Thomas Glover, a Scottish industrialist who came to Nagasaki in 1859 soon after Japan ended its isolation policy. The garden park is located in the slopes of the Minami Yamato Hill, previously designated as Nagasaki's foreign settlement, where other foreign settlers built their homes. In 1970, the government decided to preserve these western buildings and convert this place to what we now see as the Glover Garden as part of Nagasaki's history, showing European influence. Thomas Glover became an influential figure in Japan that helped to industrialize and modernize Japan. Nagasaki is the setting for the opera Madame Butterfly.